So in part one, we finished discussing how the dopamine system works. Basically, dopamine system works pushing down noradrenaline. So if you have basically have a counter in your brainstem, if that counter reaches a certain amount, means the noradrenaline certain amount, you will have quit behavior. You will want to quit immediately what you are doing, what you're investing your time in, and it's almost like he said you have no cognitive control over it. So you quit, and it's kind of you just cannot control that behavior. So dopamine will keep pushing that down. There will be then the buffer. There will be always a buffer between the noradrenaline and dopamine. And the more you can push that down, the more energy you can create. The longer you can be focused, and basically, the better you can create neuroplasticity. Dopamine does not release. It releases, but that's not really the point. It's not really that important. It releases also when you get external reward or the outcome of something, right? So let's say I want to make a successful podcast, and the outcome for me has to be 1,000 viewers daily. When I have this 1,000 viewers, when I reach that, I'm not going to be like, oh my, I might get some dopamine really. I'm like, wow, see that it seems to work. People are interested in what I'm saying. But it's the small incremental goals within your goal. It is the small milestones that you reach that are important. And the way you can do that is when you reach a milestone. Let's say, very simple. I want to stream for 5 days. Great. And I have my fifth day, and that's a small milestone. And I will self reward myself for my discipline, for spending time on my stream when I could spend it on something else. Um, that's going to release dopamine, and that's going to push down the noradrenaline, and you will want to keep going. So you won't have the quit behavior. It will be the opposite. You will just want to keep going, 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 and you can get into that flow, as they say, like a hyper state. Your mind isn't like in hyper state where it seems that you're invincible, and you can just keep focusing on something for hours upon hours without any distractions. It's almost like you're obsessed with what. Anyway, that was kind of the synopsis of the dopamine system. He will finish that, and then we will continue into more practical things that we can implement.
Keep going. And we grant that permission to ourselves. No one grants that permission to us. I think one of the other kind of misconceptions that we want to dissolve is this idea that external rewards can actually propel us down long paths of success and high performance. They can't.
No, it's internal a sustainable fuel source.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a friend from the SEAL teams, and somebody asked us recently, we were given a talk, and somebody said, how can I make sure that I continue to self-reward and I'm not driven by these external rewards? How can I continue to have that drive? And his answer was very good. He said, give away all the external rewards. Now not everyone can afford to do that.
It's just about you and you.
It's just you and you. And the more attached, there's a famous Stanford study done at Bing Nursery School, probably not far from where you were in the dormitory. There's a little nursery school in Escondido Village. And they did this study where they looked at kids that liked to playing during their recess. It's all recess in nursery school, but they're drawing. And they took the kids that really like to draw, and they started giving them little gold stars on their drawings. And then they like the gold stars for a kid. That's an extrinsic reward. And then they stopped doing that. And the kids stopped drawing. They associated the good feeling of doing it with the external rewards. Right. We have to be very cautious about how much of our internal dopamine we attach to external rewards if we want to.
Very important what he's saying. Do not... just to translate in normie language, sorry. Do not tie dopamine release and, let's say, milestones to external rewards. External rewards are very dangerous because that's not what increases this process of dopamine pushing down noradrenaline. It's the internal rewards you give yourself. So, positive self-talk when you reach something, and don't do positive self-talk. For example, if you're sad or angry, and you're like, "Oh, my situation is good," no, you cannot fool your brain. brain is very, very intelligent. It's not going to believe it. So you have to positive self-talk when you truly believe it. When you have reached something, try to do it once a day. Once a day, positive self-talk of something you've reached. Then 3 times a day. Like this, you will create a very strong positive mindset. It really does. And it helps with the process of building that infinite energy. Yeah.
Continue to grow and pursue and focus and work hard. If you just want to get to some place and cash in, then fine. But most people find themselves in a pretty miserable place because their dopamine was so attached to external rewards, they need more and more of that.
Well, the why has to be deeper than that. I mean, the thing that I kind of always default to when I hit that breaking point, or, you know, I'm training or I'm racing or whatever, and I'm at that stage where it's just like I can't go any further, the first thing I do is I reflect inward on why I'm doing this to begin with. Like, what is the value system that I'm trying to tap into? What is it that I'm trying to express? Like, what got me to this point? So it's a reminder. And then I just say, well, I'm just going to get to the next lamppost, or I'm going to, get to the next intersection, or whatever it is. I break it down into the tiny, I'll quit after that. Like, the more I can just root myself in the present moment and distill it down into the tiniest of digestible chunks, that's the only way I can, continue to move forward. And I've learned over time that the more I do that, then, suddenly I'll find myself in a different mental, like, it will shift, right? Just because I feel that way in that moment is not determinative of how I'm going to feel 10 minutes later.
Absolutely. There's an interesting process that occurs when people start to realize that rewards are all internal. And what they start to do is they start linking this duration path outcome thing to their internal rewards. And so, to put this simply, one of the most powerful things that any person can do is to learn to control this idea of duration path and outcome and attach an internal.
So, duration path outcome, or how he explains it, is DPO for short. Duration is the duration of something. So you observe something, you are highly focused on it. That should be it. You have to be highly focused on the duration path outcome, so that your brain will create the neuroplasticity, create the right environment for change. So, sorry, I just keep looking at my mic if it's on. So basically, duration is the time. How long will this thing take? To make it easy, you see a guy walking with his dog. His dog is going to do his thing. The duration is, you will think, how long will it take? How long will it take for him? It's a very stupid thing, but it's to make it easy. The path where the where the pea is going. Okay, what's the path that is going to? The outcome is that he will feel more relieved, right? That he will have done what he needed. DPO is very important, and you have to implement that. You have to make sure you have all three: duration, path. That is the right. It creates the right environment for your brain to basically, brain plasticity or neuroplasticity literally means, right, to be more kind of malleable. So malleable, it means that you can have change much easier, and you can do this for a lot of things. So you could learn a language still to this day. I'm 31. I'm sure if I learn a language, and I'm already very good with language, I speak 4 of them. I'm thinking to learn a 5th, maybe even a 6th language. If I do it the right way, and that's all internally, it's not true, what they would learn at school. Oh, if you write things in a certain way and this and that, you will learn faster. All in here, and your internal state. It's everything that we literally talked about today and in part 1.
Sense of reward, just that you're doing well. To reward yourself mentally, just say, I'm doing well. I'm actually on the right path. To do that inside of the demands that come from the external world, the more often that we can self-reward some aspect of the process, provided it's in the right direction of what we're trying to achieve, the more energy we're going to have for that, the more focus we're going to have for that. And remember, the reason I say energy, I don't throw that around loosely, is that limiting amount of noradrenaline is constantly being kept at bay. You're literally buffering the quit response. And so when people start realizing that if they set the goals inside of the larger goal and self-reward each one of those, they essentially have an infinite amount of energy to pursue those goals. They have an infinite amount of focus to pursue those goals. You see this most in the special operations community and people that are selected essentially for this process. So one of the things that's been intriguing to me, I have some friends from the SEAL teams, and I don't begin to really understand the real work that they do deployed because I've never done that kind of work. But I've always been intrigued by the selection process, the so-called BUDS process, right? Because carrying logs and getting in cold water and all that, that's not really how the work is. That's really not what the work is about. So the selection process is interesting because everyone shows up fit, motivated, and convinced that they're not going to quit. I mean, I think like there might be a couple people that just show up, but everybody is absolutely convinced. And then a very small subset of them make it through. And I'd be willing to bet that the ones that make it through, of course, they're gritty and resilient, but they all are essentially, right? So that's necessary but not sufficient, obviously. Otherwise, everyone would make it through. The people that make it through somehow are able to tap into a process. Maybe it's a reward process. Maybe it's through self-punishment. Maybe it's through self-reward in the positive sense. But they're able to control something inside an environment that is not controlled by them. It's controlled by the instructors. And I've always been struck by the fact that in order to get through, you just have to not quit. Remember, people aren't being deselected. They're not saying, get out of here, you're not good enough. People are deciding that for themselves. Right. And so it's interesting because
so that is very interesting, right? The way the SEAL operate. So the process to be selected. So you can just, if tomorrow you decide to go for a SEAL process, you can do that. You can do this training or this boot camp. And you're not being selected. People are not saying, oh, you're not good enough. You should go. You choose to quit. The people that make it have built a sort of internal process in themselves. They have found a way focus on the things that really matter and give themselves rewards, like small incremental rewards for a small incremental milestone. So that's how you keep, you have to be able, it's not, you're going to be physically exhausted. It's the mental that's going to keep you from quitting, literally. And that's pushing again down the noradrenaline.
It brings about a real world experiment of people who are quitting, and I believe they're quitting because they can't manage these neurotransmitters. And when I say manage, I think that the people that get through, knowing some of these people quite well, had an internal process by which they could reward themselves for doing something that might have just looked trivial to everybody else, but it gave them more gas, more energy. Right? And what's interesting is the process, the kind of unconscious genius of the BUDS process is that they've picked two sensory events that are across the board challenging for everybody. One is cold water, which is great because most of the time it can't kill you, right? It's not like heat, which can kill you. It's cold water and sleep deprivation. And so the ability to do these, like what I'm calling DPOs, this duration, path, and outcome steps and procedures, is great on when you're rested. When you have well-fed, well-slept, you can do anything. You can be in any hard conversation. You can work through anything. So what they do is they start taking the autonomic nervous system, which is these deep reserves of the nervous system, that when our autonomic nervous system is off, it starts making us pay more attention to how we feel than the demands of the world around us. Remember that basic challenge in the nervous system. And so sleep deprivation is the best way that you can pull somebody down from their ability to analyze duration, path, and outcome and reward themselves. Sleep deprivation is the way in which you essentially pull apart the nervous system and the way that it wants to function, because it's very easy, again, rested, to do all this. But so what they do is they're sleep deprived people. They put them in cold water. They're trying to get them more in touch with the way that they feel inside than what they need to do in response to the external demands.
Right.
And
so the reason also why they're quitting is based on how they feel. If inside you feel depressed, you feel bad, you feel tired, you will want to quit. That's why meditation. I've been meditating for 2 years. I've been allowed to be kind of a master of my emotions. Not always. Sometimes my emotions stay. I'm very stable. I know what's going on inside. I know how to change things, and that is meditation. And you become hyper aware of your surroundings. When I go to a bar, I literally see everything, so that I will always be the first to act. It's really crazy. But when I'm having a very intense discussion with someone face to face, then I forget what's going on. Then basically time and space stop to happen. The reason why time and space feel like they don't exist for that time is because you're hyper focused. You're hyper focused on someone. That's why. Yeah. So takeaway also is just try to always get into that deep focus of something. That means you have to build DPO in your process, consciously and subconsciously, and then you will be ready for change. Just deep focus. It's not that hard. I can be very focused on my about my stream, so I always know what's going on. I am extremely focused, and I understand everything they're saying, and I can also think for myself at the same time. It's not as easy as you might think. But I've been trained on that in school, which is like understanding what you're reading, basically. I don't know how you would say it in English. Um, yes. So let's continue.
Everyone I know that's made it through that process did it slightly differently, but I'll tell you how they didn't do it. They didn't do it through sheer grit and determination. They did it through attaching a sense of meaning. They did it by micro slicing the day, or slicing the day into a series of meals that they just needed to get to, and then rewarding themselves for getting to that next milestone. So they don't know, I mean, most of them, probably had very low concept of dopamine and norepinephrine, but that's the process. That's also the process, I think, that allows someone to finish an ultra. I've never run an ultra, but I think that process of self-reward is grit and resilience in a kind of neurochemical definition.
Yeah.
And I think it's the thing that anybody can tap into. And I think it's so key, because I think people think that it's just so key that people understand, that these circuits are not unique to people who run ultras or people that make it through, stringent filter special operations command. It's the same thing that
it is interesting. Yeah, the ultimate determinant isn't your physical conditioning, and yet that's what everybody focuses on. It's what's going on internally, mentally, neurochemically, that's making the difference. And the people that are able to best calibrate that and find these, strategies for managing that are the ones that get through, whether it is an ultra or buds. And buds is like this perfect, it's almost like its own lab, right? For studying human resilience in a certain respect. But you have actually taken some of these people and tested them in your lab, including David Goggins, right? So what do you do when these people visit you and you're like, I'm going to deconstruct you here, figure out what makes you tick?
Yeah. So I had the good fortune of meeting David at a consulting event a few years ago, and I guess I should just say, David, you probably know this already, but he is every bit as intense as he comes across.
Yeah, I mean, what you see online is exactly, it's exactly
what you see is what you get. Really wonderful and obviously extremely impressive human being. So little David anecdote. So the night before we had this event, he came out to the lab. My lab, we study fear, we study courage, we study resilience, and we study the underlying neurochemical substrates for those. So we had a bunch of guys there, a couple team guys, some other folks, and we bring them in this little room and we do virtual reality there. And one of the things that we use to scare people or to generate a sense of autonomic arousal is this experience of diving with great white sharks, which of course you're not in water in the laboratory, but it's very immersive. And for people that are afraid of sharks, it can be quite scary. Not always, but we also have heights.
So here he's talking about his experimental laboratory, which works on understanding brain plasticity, neuroregeneration, but also like he's studying fear, anger, courage, resilience. And to me, that's very interesting because if they understand how it works, we could control that. Basically, we could control our emotions. We could be courageous, or we could understand when most likely that will happen, that feeling, and how to be resilient. Brain resilience, which means you will have less chance of depressions. I would love to see that lab, and I would love to be like a part of that experiment. That would be super interesting. Yeah, I have like arachnophobia. I have a bit scaredness of heights. The interesting thing is I'm more scared of spiders than height, but I think I could um, get rid of my fear of spiders, but not get rid of my fear of heights. It's strange.
We have claustrophobia. We got something where you can feel spiders crawling all over your body. If you're an arachnophobe, if you have a pain point, we find it.
Do you spend time trying to figure out what that pain point is?
We do, and we do it through some very covert methodology that involves AI and some fun tools.
A bunch of weird questions that, right, all right.
Let's just say this, from the moment you step into our laboratory, we're studying you. So
now I know.
And yeah, exactly. So what was fun was, so I sort of explained what the platform was and what we were going to do. And David said, he goes, I don't like sharks. And I was like, all right, well. And so then, this was not a typical experimental day in the lab. So I just kind of, at one point I finished describing what the tech is and how we're going to wire people in. And then I said, so who wants to go first? And he's like, I'll go.
Right, of course.
And what was funny to me at that moment, I realized this is interesting because he was very explicit about the fact that he didn't like sharks. He was very explicit about the fact that he was going to be first man in. I mean, it would be inappropriate for me to describe his data, right? And we didn't do a full-blown experiment. But what I can say is whatever it is that David has figured out how to do, it clearly involves taking whatever adrenaline pulse he.
So he said that he had an experience with David Goggins about fear. So how do you combat fear? You cannot trick your brain thinking there is no fear. That's the first thing he said. The second thing is fear, the only way to truly combat it is by going through it. By taking what you call, I'm not a Scientologist, I'm not a Scientologist either. I'm not a psychologist. But I think the term is moving forward. They speak a lot about movement, action, forwardness. So moving forward, so you go ahead on your fear. And once you accept that fear, it does not become a fear anymore. So you have control over your fears, which you can actually remove all of your fears, which is amazing. That will give you true power. Every person on this planet still has fears. Sometimes they don't realize it. Sometimes it depends on your traumas as well. Because my mom goes completely nuts when she sees spiders. I don't. I still have control. She doesn't. I think it's almost like genetic or something. I don't know. It's very strange. It's like because it's something mental. So she gave me something mental, which is a very interesting thing in itself.
He feels, and understanding something fundamental to biology, which is that adrenaline response was designed to move us, not to keep us stationary. He uses behavior as the way to shift sensation, perception, feelings, and thoughts. He understands how to run that program in the right direction. Whereas most people, when they don't like what they feel, they start negotiating sensation, which will never work. They start trying to control their perception, which is hard, right? They're like, I'm not going to think about that, or I'll think about it differently. Very hard to control the mind with the mind. He knows that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Feelings, Lord knows what those are and how to control them. I mean, we'll eventually figure that out as a field, but thoughts are complicated. So he just goes immediately to action. Immediately
right
to
towards
action.
It. So when he says, just for clarity, when he says, I don't like sharks, he's basically saying, put me in the shark tank. Like he's cueing you to say, this is the thing I'm afraid of, and I'm going to be the first one to volunteer, and I know you're going to put me in the shark tank if I tell you that. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, and I obviously can't speak for him, but one of the things I think is very clear is that he's tapped into this neuroplasticity process through the the door through the portal of agitation and stress. He's figured out, and this is really the holy grail of neuroscience, is how can I modify my brain? Well, you modify it by placing yourself into discomfort and using that as a propeller to move you into action. And a couple years later, when David was working on his book, and I heard the book was coming out, I think I saw a pre-release announcement. I texted him and I just said, "Look, I'm really excited to see your book." And he said, "Oh, great, thank you. It'd be great if you'd write something about it, like an endorsement." I said, "Oh, I'd be honored to. I'm happy to." And he said, "But I need it tonight."
Right.
And this was Saturday at, I think it was like 10:30 at night when I texted him. So I said, "Great, well, I'd be happy to. I won't do it now." And he said, "I need it by midnight." So I sit down and I start writing this thing. And these are short blurbs, but I kind of realized that, you want to get it right. It's David, and my name's next to it, and I want to do it justice. So I'm sitting down, I'm working on this thing, and I text him, "Look, I'm going to be a few minutes late. No problem, no problem." Finally, I send him the thing at like 12:30 at night. And he's like, "Oh, bro, thank you. I promise I'll send you a copy," this and that. And I was like, grateful, thank you. And then I realized that that time he was living in New York. And I said, "Wait a second, where are you?" He said, "New York." And I said, "It's 3:30 in the morning." And he goes, "Yeah, I'm going running."
Of course.
And I realized at that point, I was like, okay, it's undisputable.
Right.
This guy lives the persona that he projects into the world. And even that day, that consulting gig, there was a 4 o'clock lag, and he was like, "No, let's keep going." So he's figured something out. And I think that his enormous popularity it's earned because he's figured out that it really doesn't matter if you come at something from a place of joy and love, and that would be wonderful. But there's a whole other set of ways to approach this that involve slogging through the discomfort, the doubts, the wish for things to be different, and starting with behavior. Yeah. And it's incredible because if you think about sensation, perception, feeling, thought, and behavior, actually the way to control our nervous system and feel the way we want to feel is to run that backwards. Behavior, thoughts. So if you change your behavior, then generally your thoughts, your feelings, and your perceptions change.
Yeah.
And everyone tries to come at it from the other end, but he's figured out through whatever process led him there and incredible life circumstances, how to run it in this direction of behavior first. Yeah. And I really think that if neuroscience has anything to offer, it's some understanding of what the underlying chemicals and neural circuits are, but the sooner that the human animal, the human species can start to understand that our feelings and our thoughts and our memories and all that is very complicated, but that when behaviors are very concrete and they are the control panel for the rest of it. I don't want to relegate feelings. Feelings are extremely important. I don't want to relegate perception. They're extremely important. But when it comes to wanting to shift the way that you function, to get better or to perform better or to show up better or to move away from things like addictive behaviors, it's absolutely foolish for any of us, me included, to think that we can do that by changing our thoughts first. It's behavior first, thoughts, feelings, and perceptions follow.
Mood follows action.
Mood follows
action. This has
action.
been my mantra forever, and I swear by it. And David's example illustrates that act first. He's developed so much.
So how do you do first behavior, change of behavior, so that all the rest follows? By stretching your comfort zone. If you do new things, you go out of your comfort zone all the time, you will encounter these moments of what he explains, basically. So I think that's why you have to build on stretching your comfort zone. My comfort zone is extremely stretched. I don't know why. Maybe because I'm not conservative and because my parents have always let me to do anything. So I'm a very free-spirited kind of guy. I always joke that if I was born in the 70s, I would be a hippie. I've always wanted to go to that concert in the US, the biggest one. Anyway, I've yeah. Now, so first I was stretched zone, and then I found a way to build neuroplasticity. So these two are linked, but they're not the same. Now I'm only learning how to really change my mind and my behavior because I still had a lot of social anxiety. I still had a lot of mood swings, and I've worked through them. I've worked through them through meditation, through DPO. It's true. And I'm going to be a little bit controversial here, but I don't care. Everything is controversy. Marijuana has helped me to build that. It gave me two things: deep focus, and then my brain luckily picked up on that, and then learning new things about myself, the world, thinking out of the box, really crazy fucking ideas. And when you get through that state, you become a stronger person. But to me, it has taken me 2 years of, and I don't smoke it. I only eat it, and it has given me amazing, really. I feel more clear. I can explain myself better. It's it's Mother Earth. Why there has to be a reason why it's on the planet, right? Why? And why can we? Why did humanity find a way to use that and really alter our brain functions? And we have so many drugs, right? We have also psychedelics, but I am a little bit scared of that because I'm quite happy with how I think stuff. I'm scared it will make me crazy. Like there was this guy, I don't know, he was like a big athlete and stuff, and like he made pranks, and then he got completely crazy. Would like to make a documentary. That's what I'm scared will happen to me.
Much neural plasticity that it's reflexive for him to just move towards the hard thing or the challenge or the discomfort, right? And now the science establishes that this is indeed the case. And yet our programming, our default hardwiring is to put us in this place where we want to ruminate on all this stuff and wait until we feel like doing something before we do it, or check our motivations for it. But anytime I'm in a funk or I want to change my state, I have to move forward. I have to do something with my physical body in order to shake things up and, rearrange whatever's going on mentally. So, and it works every time.
It works every time because the brain circuits, meaning sets of connections and chemicals, they're there from birth, they're there your whole life, and they were designed for that. So in 2018, a graduate student in my lab published a paper in Nature showing that in the face of a physical threat, there are three options. You can obviously freeze, you can retreat, or you can move forward. And the moving forward response actually triggers activation of a connection in the brain to the dopamine circuitry of the brain and makes it more likely that you're going to be able to move forward in the future. Now, what was interesting to us was that not only is forward action rewarded at a neurochemical level, which then sets you up for more forward action, but the highest level of agitation and stress was associated with moving forward. We always think, well, if I just calm myself enough, I'll be able to move forward.
Right.
But it's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And so people who are paralyzed in fear or that have a hard time initiating, sometimes the key is to raise the level of stress and agitation. This is why deadlines are so effective.
Right.
This is why fear is so effective. This is why that deer gets up out of its, nice little den and starts to move, because it feels a certain level of agitation. If that agitation isn't high enough, we will not move forward. And so especially in the US, we have a culture in which stress has been created. These ideas around stress is that it's terrible for us, when in fact stress is designed to move us forward towards these action steps that are rewarded, which then move us forward, and so on.
So what is the process of combating that, monkey mind that is, running whatever narrative that's keeping you stuck? Like, it's easy to say, like, just move, you got to take the action.
Sure.
But a lot of people still, despite understanding that, intellectualizing that, are unable to, basically act as if.
Yeah, I think we're dealing with two general categories of people who have problems with motivation and focus. And I think we've failed to I think we failed to describe the fact that there are two groups and not one. We think, well, I need to calm myself enough to move forward. I think, and then other people say, well, no, you need to kind of ramp yourself up to move forward. Here's the way I conceptualize it based on the data that I'm aware of. Some people are just hypo-aroused. They're just not motivated enough. And those people would benefit greatly from cultivating practices like superoxygenated breathing. So this is something along the lines of like Tumo type breathing. So rapid, and we look at this in the lab, we're actually running a human study on this now. So 25 or 30 deep breaths through the nose and out through the mouth, then exhaling the breath and holding, learning how to self-generate adrenaline. That's what you're doing when you're doing
some
that.
version of the Wim Hof technique. Or
that's what that is.
Brian McKenzie talks about.
Right. An ice bath is doing the exact same thing. Stimulating adrenaline response. It actually improves the immune system. There's a published paper on this. Releases adrenaline, which buffers the immune system against infection. But getting good at taking yourself from low energy to higher energy. And then learning how to compress your focus. And I'll talk about the focus thing in a minute. Some people are so agitated, the monkey mind, they got too many things going on and they're thinking, okay, they're trying to sit down and write. I suffer from this. And I'm feeling like, wait, I've also got this person I need to connect with. And I'm kind of being drawn off course by not being able to put the blinders on. For people that have that issue, I think learning how to calm the nervous system is very powerful. And the best way that I know how to do that is based on two studies, one published in Nature, one published in Cell Reports recently, showing that physiological sighs, there's actually a thing in the literature called physiological sighs, are one of the fastest ways to bring our overall levels of autonomic arousal down. And a physiological sigh is 2 inhales followed by an extended exhale. So it's like, it's not just a deep breath, it's 2 inhales followed by an exhale, okay? And then what that does, and this has been shown several times now in humans and other species as well, is it dilates the little sacs of the lungs, and that second inhale dilates them a little bit more, and it pulls a little bit of carbon dioxide out of the bloodstream so that when we exhale, we offload the maximum amount of carbon dioxide, and it perfectly adjusts the ratio of carbon dioxide and oxygen in the bloodstream and lungs. And sometimes it only takes one of these double inhale exhales. Sometimes somebody needs to do 2 or 3. But that's the fastest way to bring the autonomic nervous system down. A lot of people need such a tool because I think we talk a lot about meditation and tools for calm, and I can go to Esalen for a weekend and get a massage. I'm going to feel very good. But then when I'm thrown back in real life, I need something that's going to work in real time, what I call a real-time tool. And most people don't know how to control their autonomic nervous system because it's complicated. I can't control my liver function. I can eat, that will calm me, but that has complicated, issues with it too if I'm just eating to calm myself. So the diaphragm is the one skeletal muscle organ that was internally, right? We've got obviously skeletal muscles designed to move things. It's a skeletal muscle organ, unlike the spleen, the liver, the heart, etc. It was designed to be moved voluntarily. And these physiological sighs are actually occurring fairly regularly during sleep to adjust our levels of carbon dioxide and oxygen. And there's a recent study showing that in claustrophobia, this is the breathing pattern that people default to try and offload that carbon dioxide. So whereas there are a lot of really interesting breathing techniques, Wim Hof, Brian McKenzie does great work, Patrick McEwen, the Laird and Gabby, the tons of people doing really interesting things out there. My lab has been focused on what are the neural circuits that are designed to achieve particular states that happen to impinge on and capture diaphragm function. And so the reason I think breathing is so powerful is that everyone has a diaphragm, and it's the immediate link to the body. A lot's been made of the vagus nerve. The vagus is the path between the body and mind, but the vagus is very slow. The vagus nerve calming is what you experience when you eat a rich meal, or you've had a long day and you put your feet up and you're finally relaxing. It takes minutes to hours to kick in. Whereas the diaphragm is real-time control over your brain state. So the brain knows what the body is doing by how fast the diaphragm is moving. It knows its overall activation state. So when you breathe quickly, those 25 or 30 breaths, the brain says, oh, I must be alert. I'm going to start secreting some noradrenaline. And when you breathe slowly, that level of noradrenaline drops down. So it sounds so simple, but I think it's only in the last 2 or 3 years that my lab and Mark Krasnow's lab at Stanford and other labs elsewhere in the world have started to identify the neurons in the brain that are linked to breathing and how those two things relate to one another. And I think everybody should have a kit of tools that they can use to bring themselves down and ramp themselves up. I'll just say one other thing about focus. So when we're in a high alert state, something very powerful happens that I think partially explains your ability now to drop into this book writing. When there's a certain amount of adrenaline in our system, our pupils dilate. Remember, the eyes are not connected to the brain. Our eyes are actually two pieces of central nervous system. They are two pieces of brain outside the skull that were designed to control our overall arousal state. And so we can talk about this as it relates to sleep and sleep quality, but when I bring up the level of adrenaline in my body through breathing, or let's say I see a troubling text, or let's just say I just use a very Goggins type approach and just figure out the most painful, inspiring for me reason to do it. You know, it sounds vague because obviously, David, I don't know what goes on in your head, but a tremendous respect for your ability to do this. But he just ratchets himself out of that ditch and puts himself in motion. The pupils dilate. And when that happens, our visual system actually enters something that's a little bit more like portrait mode on our phone. There's a process called accommodation, and your ability to focus on one thing visually actually becomes better, and your ability to see everything else blurs away. And that's the ability to just see that screen of text, or that if you work on pad and paper, to just see that pad and paper. And then as you start writing, what people don't realize is that mental focus follows visual focus. Now, in blind people, it's slightly different. It follows auditory focus. But in most people, your visual focus, as you bring that into really sharp relief, that image of your book, and you stare at it, you're going to feel some agitation and your mind's going to be jumping all over the place. But if you wait just a couple minutes, the rest of the world will disappear. I think this is sort of like the flow state people are looking for. But remember, the gate of entry is one of you have to wade through some sewage before you can swim in clear water. Right. That's the way I always think about it. But the visual focus is what brings the rest of the brain into cognitive focus. And people in the martial arts understand this. You've probably experienced this running when you're feeling exhausted and you can just concentrate on one milestone and get there. You can almost bring that into what you're doing is you're linking that to the dopamine circuitry. You're not winning a race, not some other thing outside this immediate environment, that thing. And when you're able to start capturing these peripheral circuits, meaning the body, the diaphragm, the visual system, then you start getting past this whole idea of mindsets, and it really becomes about the body setting the mind. And this is where I think when you say action leads the rest, right? What you're saying is grounded in real neurobiological data.
There's also a shift in your perception of time when you're in that state. Suddenly your relationship with time becomes completely different.
Extremely interesting stuff. I love this podcast. It is so eye-opening, but I watched it now for a third time because it's quite complicated to understand. I'm not very familiar with psychology in terms of theory. I haven't never learned it. I've never had I've only practiced it in social behaviorism for my self-pleasure. It's not the same, I love watching people, observing them, and understanding what they're going to do. I can predict most of the time what they will do. Behavior becomes a pattern becomes very predictable. Predictability I'm able to calculate. It's kind of like a superpower. Ugh, fuck. Okay, so I will have to go, guys. I will have to leave here. Hope you enjoyed it. Part 3 will come tomorrow.
So I'm really glad